Hi everyone, Jeremy here, Damn Good Doctors Club. Today we're going to talk about the Red Queen's race and how that applies to your practice, whether online, offline, or both. So we're going to be covering some concepts that have to do with commoditization, habituation. We'll talk about spiders. We're going to talk about the microbiome, the I Ching, implementing Taoist principles. I've got a few things on my mind here. So I'm out. You may hear some crickets and frogs and things like that. I'm out this evening, and I thought I would just bring the microphone and get some of this stuff off my chest, and I hope that it helps you in your personal and professional development. So, first of all, if you're not familiar with this idea of the Red Queen's race, it's from Alice in Wonderland. And there's a scene, and this actually gets quoted a lot with some of the people kind of talking about psychology and the way the world is moving so fast. But this little scene gets pulled up a lot, and it has to do with Alice running with the Red Queen. And she says that, here we are in a land where just to stand still, you have to be running very, very quickly, right? That's the idea. So it's this kind of idea. It's like you're on a treadmill, right? You're just running just to stay in one place. And I want to kind of bring this to another concept. I used to be in a really high level business mastermind, and we would bat this idea around a lot of the escalator. And basically it's like you're on an escalator that's always going down. And instead of a treadmill, you're trying to like not only climb forward, but also climb up on this escalator. So you're going to be working, you're going to be growing, right? And if you do it at a certain rate, you're going to kind of stay in the same place. And what I mean by that with the escalator is that the escalator goes down in terms of you make some progress, right? You become a very forward thinker and you create something, or you can deliver care at a certain level or whatever it is. And eventually the market starts to catch up, meaning you have other people doing similar things to what you're doing, or you just have a more savvy base of patients, people's sophistication levels go up. This is something that initially people fear. And, practitioners, like we put on our entrepreneurial hats and we start to do these big strides in business, and we feel special because we've made some progress, but then we wind up going down, down, down if we stand still, because that's the nature of the escalator and we fear it. I will say this is actually a good thing, because I've made this argument for a long time, is that there's another saying, as a quote, that the future is here already, it's just not evenly distributed, right? So there are certain people, if you're very, very forward thinking and you're doing a damn good job and you're using whole systems thinking and you're really diving in and helping people with their whole situation, right? You're going to be delivering a very high quality of care. And not everybody can have access to that immediately. And I know that we've had conversations at our summit events about, how do I help everybody, regardless of their financial means and all that. And there's different business models. Like there's different ways to do this. But one of the things that I've suggested is, while you're kind of getting started up, is to go for a vertical in your niche that has the financial resources to support you in your practice, because it's going to be not only that you can't help everybody all the time, but also not everybody's ready for your help all the time. Like the bell curve, it doesn't mean that you need to be able to reach everybody on the bell curve at once, and that's the problem, is that it's segmented. What the problem is a lot of times people's problem awareness and solution readiness, like they're not open-minded enough. And there'll be some people right at the front of the bell curve that are actually ready for what it is you're doing, especially if it's innovative and comprehensive and deep. So I say cater to them, right? Make something for them. And just know that that's the first step of your plan, because you're going to be getting that initial proof of concept. You're going to be validating your ideas. You're going to be like building up a tribe around this. But you want people that can actually pay you and support you, so you don't go out of business in the meantime while you're trying to get some momentum, because then later you can grab onto early majority, maybe late majority, maybe laggards, right? Like the very last tip of the bell curve. You can kind of work your way through that. So you want to focus on people that are ready for what it is you have to say, and it's not going to be a lot of people. However, as time goes on, there's going to be other voices, like other practitioners coming out into the environment, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is, and the general public consciousness level is going to start to raise, right? Which means the standards the average person comes to expect become higher, which means that you won't stand out as much if you're only halfway up the escalator and kind of like treading water up there, right? You have to keep pushing, keep growing, keep innovating so that you can stay ahead of that and you can continue to be a leader. Or that's fine, stay where you are and do a good job, and just know that the environment's going to change around you and everything's going to kind of, relative to you, it's going to come up and catch you, right? So you'll become kind of more average in terms of the whole field, the whole profession, right, has all evolved. So now you used to be special and now you're average. And one of the examples I'll give you is personally for me, when I started building out the initial version of Modern Vitality, we had a lot of information in there about the gut microbiome and how interesting it is that these bacteria can influence so much of your health and physiology. And at the time, right, 2017, 2018, I don't know if you remember that, but there weren't a lot of people talking about it at all. And now it's become very common, right? Everybody knows about the gut microbiome. These facts have kind of filtered into the public consciousness and the public subconscious, which is great, right? But I can't be going around talking about that like it's going to be earth-shattering for people and kind of pinning my whole career on that if the entire market is shifted to where everybody kind of knows it as common sense, right? So we have to be able to evolve. And oftentimes the evolution, I would say, is actually going to come in 5 parts. I'm not going to go through all that right now, but one of the evolutions is to go from adding more and more facts to being able to connect those facts together, right? So yes, there's a microbiome, great, right? But you're not going to get any points for acknowledging that these days. Now you have to know how to work with it, right? What to do with it, how to engage with that. So if you have a background in Eastern medicine, you've got a significant head start on that because we already kind of have that built into the DNA of our medicine. So just know there is a Red Queen's race happening. And I see this as good. I mean, I'm a lifelong learner. I want to go deep and continue researching and learning things and helping people at more and more granular levels. So, I've accepted this and I've put on my hat of going, all right, well, we're going to be on the escalator, and that's okay. I don't mind. I'll run up the escalator. Right? But we need to understand that there is habituation and there is this kind of constant downward trend of normalizing greatness. And you can give people epiphanies and really change their life. And the next day or a week later or a month later, whatever, they'll forget, right? They forget where they've come from. Yeah, it's sometimes one of these things where like you don't know how good you have it until you have contrast and get it taken away. And it's just gone and done. And most people can't go back in time, right? So if they come to see you and they're really sick and just struggling with chronic fatigue or whatever it is, right? They're all inflamed or they have an eating disorder or they're depressed or PTSD or whatever's going on and it's ruining their life. And then you help them, right? At first, it's this dramatic thing where they're like, holy smokes, this is so significant. And then eventually they normalize. Eventually the escalator goes down again and they reacclimate to the new normal. And they don't necessarily go back in time to have contrast, right? We have a fallible human memory and it's easy to forget just how shitty things were or just how far we've come. So I would encourage you to know this, right? And this stuff is like so deep and so nuanced, but just know that this is a human psychological factor and to build in mechanisms into your paracosm, into your world where you can have time capsules and points of reference so that people can go back and they can see how far they come. Because sometimes I've seen this happen too, where you have a patient, and again, all my systems have come out from my own experience where I have an interaction and it leaves a weird taste in my mouth. And then I reverse engineer everything about it. And I go, how did this come to be? And then can I put new systems in place to prevent this from happening again? So for example, one of those might be somebody who came in with a laundry list of conditions. And maybe you've had a patient like this where they've got like 10,000 things wrong with them, right? 10,001, and you're working together. 10,000 of those things are markedly improved or no longer problems. And they're like a brand new person. And there's one little thing, like they've still got, sinus congestion or something like that. When their list was just all this stuff of depression, insomnia, and low libido and all this, and they still got like allergies or something. And that's what they fixate on. That's what they focus on. And you start talking to them and it's like, oh, how's everything going? Oh, well, I just don't feel like I'm getting anywhere because this sinus thing is just really persistent. And you want to shake them because you're like, you were basically dying in front of me when you first came here. Like, and it's not for you, the practitioner. Like, hey, give credit to my treatments. I mean, some of that is there and it's important for you to prevent burnout, to make sure that you know that you're doing good work. But some of it is to just like shake them for their own morale and go, give yourself some credit. Give your body some credit. You've been through so much fucking stuff and you've made so much progress you're not acknowledging because you're only focusing on the last little problem, right? And yes, we have to deal with that. We're going to keep dealing with that. But this should be based on like a baseline of 95, 98% of just, holy smokes, I can't believe how far I've come. This is amazing. Right? So you have to be able to realign people's attitudes, and it's nothing that they're doing wrong, it's just because human memory is fallible. We tend to focus on problems. We have loss aversion, where negative things weigh more in our minds than positive things do. So you want to start to build in systems here, different ways to create contrast. And I've done it. I've had people come into Modern Vitality totally digitally online, and they make these great strides, and then they're getting close to the renewal time and they're complaining about something. Oh yeah, well, I still have this skin issue on my hands. And it's like, are you kidding me? You were dying in bed, and now you're back to life, dancing and traveling and doing all these things. Like, you have to be ready to realign people to just how far they've come so that they understand what their body's capable of. So I have mechanisms in place. I've got a bunch of them. One thing you can do, I'll give you one tip here real quick, and this is just to kind of prevent that habituation from making them lose perspective, right? Because you're taking somebody up escalator after escalator after escalator. And even if the escalator gets all the way down to its bottom, it's still like the bottom of the escalator is still on the third floor now, right? You've gone first floor, second floor, you've done all these things with them. So you can take them back. So one technique is to have built in where people join your program and they take a selfie video and they take a snapshot. It's a time capsule of what's going on, and they don't have to share it with anybody. They don't have to share it with you. They take it and it's just for them. Take it for their own self. And they talk about it. What's going on? Why am I doing this program? What am I hoping to have happen here? What are my symptoms? Like, what's it robbing from my life? And they just get kind of raw and they give themselves a live journal entry. And I really like the selfie video because you've got not only the facts, right, the explicit list of problems, but you've also got all the implicit things, like what they look like, right? Do they have sunken eyes with big dark bags underneath? Is their complexion really pale, right? Do they look frail? What do they sound like? Are they breathing well? Is their voice, like what kind of emotions are in their voice? All these things, like all these little things that contribute to the richness of our human experience. And make no mistake, if you're helping people heal, that's one of the main goals, is to help the people you come into contact with have a much more rich human experience. So we take note of that. We make a time capsule. I don't have to see the video. I just want it to exist. And then later, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, however long you're working with the person, they oftentimes will reference it themselves. And they'll come into the group and go, holy fuck, I rewatched my selfie video from when I started this program. I can't believe it. I can't believe what a new person I am, right? Because especially if they're having gradual changes over time, they don't always notice just how far they've come. Just like with having little kids around, they grow so slowly, you don't see them grow. But, the grandparents, if they haven't seen them in a couple months, they're like, whoa, you shot up, it's like that. And you can build systems. I'm giving you one of many practical techniques and pieces you can have in your paracosm that create the conditions whereby you can help somebody realign to the reality of just how far they've come. And it's really important to have this at a visceral level where they can hear themselves talk. Oh, my voice used to be so frail and so weak, and I can hear the anxiety in my voice from back then. I don't even feel like that anymore, right? They're not going to want to be reminded of that all the time. Who would? But when it's time for some morale, or if somebody, here's the other side, right? If somebody's giving you shit in your group and trying to say like, oh, this program, I don't know, I had such high hopes coming in, just tell them, hey, one of the best things to do is go back to your time capsule, right? Because guess what? We're getting to this level where we don't react, we predict, right? We predict. And we can do that because we have experience. If you don't have much experience, you're borrowing mine, because I've learned a shit ton of hard lessons that now help me predict the future. So we can set up conditions where you're going to have a much easier time with what could be a difficult interaction. Habituation's a real thing. People can get used to stuff. When I was 18, I traveled around Australia and Europe by myself. I was trying to figure out kind of who I was. I was going to explore the world and figure out my place in it. And I spent some time in Australia, and here's the habituation story, is that I'd heard about some of the wildlife in Australia, and people always say things like, oh, everything's huge down there and it can all kill you, and all these kind of like weird things, like it's not all koala bears and kangaroos, right? There's still this kind of other stuff going on. And I saw some really big snakes for sure. But one of the things were these huntsman spiders. And the first time I saw one, I was staying at a youth hostel at the beach in the North Beaches of Sydney. And I went into my room, and this spider, like the size of my palm or hand or whatever, was running around on the wall and on the bed frame. And I was like, oh no, wow. So I like threw my stuff down. I ran downstairs. I talked to the lady at the desk. I said, "There's a giant spider in my room." And, she looked at me and she was like, "Well, yeah, that's fine. That's a huntsman." And I was like, "Okay, well, this is my first time with these huntsman spiders, right?" So, I mean, where I come from, like upstate New York, we didn't really have giant spiders on the wall. It was just a whole different thing for me. It kind of broke my brain that she was so nonchalant about it. And I'm not a big spider killer, but I'm like, we're gonna need a bowl or something to get this thing out of here. It's massive. And she's like, "No, it's fine. You don't have to mess with it. Just leave it alone." And so I learned about the huntsman spiders, and apparently, they don't really do webs. They just kind of stalk their prey, and they'll just go pounce on mosquitoes and things like that. So they're actually kind of useful. And a fair amount of people in Australia don't mind. They actually call them house spiders, and they just let them live in their house, and they keep the mosquitoes away and other things. So I went from being totally freaked out, seeing this spider from across the room, to very quickly habituating to where I could lay down to go to sleep, and on the wall next to my head is the spider. And I was just like, "Good night, spider." And I just went to sleep, right? Not something I would have thought was part of my character or part of my personality prior to that event. But I had new information. I normalized. I habituated, right? Something that initially had a very high amplitude for me became normal very, very quickly, right? We can get used to things. People get used to things. People get used to the good and the bad. Right. And that's something else that happens too, because guess what? When somebody comes in with problems, like they've got fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or autoimmune or Lyme disease or something like that, they may have been dealing with that for so long that they've had a ton of time to habituate to it. A ton of time. If I can go from being terrified of a spider to like tuck, tuck, night, night, spider within a matter of a couple days, right? Just imagine, especially if somebody feels powerless about their health, how much they can habituate to it over the course of decades. And this is how it starts to become part of their identity. So now you have this other layer, because if you really want to help somebody, you're not just at the superficial layer of recommending your herbs or your solution or whatever your technical intervention is, but you're also working on helping them disentangle their identity from the problem, right? This is a different layer, a different level. And if you want to be able to do this kind of work, you've got to be able to have these kinds of conversations, both explicitly and implicitly, without triggering the ego, red alert, sound the alarm defense system, right? And there's a finesse to that. There's an art to that. But just know that your people are most likely used to a lot of their problems. And this helps too, because when we start to come at these problems and we aim really high, and I've seen a lot, I've gone through hundreds, almost 1,000 different practitioners, websites, web presence, how they speak, what their offers are. I did a massive analysis just to kind of see the state of the field. And I see a lot of things people are doing that are all pretty much the same. And it's like you promise the moon to everybody. "Oh, we want you pain-free, living your best life, like total energy, never a problem, sleeping like a rock every night." It's just always the extreme promises. And I would say that if people have habituated to their problem, that when you make promises of what amounts to basically curing and fixing and making perfect everything in their life, you're threatening part of their identity, and also you're losing credibility right off the bat, because they're like, "Listen, I've been adjusting to this for the last 20, 30 years. You're not the first doctor I've seen for help. I don't expect 100% improvement," right? So you're actually overshooting their expectations on the front end, which is dangerous, right? Overshooting their expectations on the back end, like over delivering. See, not over promise, right? But over deliver. That's great. That's where we get people coming in and they say, "You've exceeded my expectations." Or, "I thought I could get maybe 50% better, and now I'm 90, 95% better and don't even identify as being a person with an illness anymore." Okay, those are the kinds of things that, like, there's so much nuance to this, but so many practitioners are missing the mark because they're coming out swinging. And I used to do the same thing, and it's well-intentioned, but you're coming out swinging, promising the world, because most likely you actually can deliver it if you know what you're doing, right? Especially if you've got outside variables covered and minimized, and you're doing good filtering. But you don't always want to lead with that, right? If you set the bar too high, people just think, "Well, this can't be real. It's not realistic." And some of that has to do with their habituation to being ill, right? And just kind of getting used to it. So habituation, the escalator, being commoditized, right? That's another thing, because you're kind of on this escalator where the better you do, the more value you bring, the more of an innovator you are in the field, the more likely, you are to have somebody copy you. And then basically when people copy you, they just try to compete on price, right? So they'll do what you do, but do it cheaper as best they can. And now you're being commoditized and kind of brought down. So there's a lot of things that happen there. And I say we just have to you don't want to lose to the Red Queen's race and just keep running until you're exhausted. But if you do embrace this thing and own it, I would say that a different level opens up where whatever escalator you're trying to race up, you can actually kind of find the fractal next level up of that. So I know this is a big weird claim. I look at things like the I Ching and how change is a constant. Right? That's the only thing constant is change. So we have to understand that and just assume that change is going to be downward escalator force, right? And if we ever get a boost, that's a bonus. But we just assume that the constant change is always going to be a higher sophistication in the marketplace that we need to keep up with, right? Meaning maybe your patients want you to know some science terms. They're getting sophisticated. That's okay. Or maybe everybody is coming online and they're trying to do the same thing you're doing, but they're trying to do it for much cheaper or free, right? Okay. Well, guess what? There's another level that we can play at. There's another fractal level. So for example, and I already hinted at this earlier, but one kind of quantum leap out of that is when everybody's competing on the what level, meaning, oh, here comes a fact. Here comes a fact. Did you know that your microbiome can influence your personality traits, that you can become more extroverted or introverted by eating different types of food? Oh, interesting. Oh, did you know that here's your circadian rhythm and you need to have this kind of sleep hygiene and do all these things? Oh, isn't that interesting? Right? You can go on Instagram and you can see people just fact dumping, right? And if part of your identity and part of your career and part of the value and part of your ability to ride that escalator and start walking upwards is driven by the reality that you have a bunch of facts at your disposal, right? Facts, F-A-C-T-S, facts, little tidbits of information. And you have very nuanced and granular facts. That's great. But ultimately, you're going to be running the fact race against all these other people with all these other facts, right? It's okay. But what I'll say is we move from that. That's an earth level, right? It's all resources. These are things we need to gather up so you can actually do something. You need the facts, right? But that's not the end of it. You need to actually start to organize. You need to move from earth to metal. You need to organize those resources and create structured plans, right? So the difference between somebody who knows a lot of shit, random shit, and they put it on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, versus somebody who knows the same or even less stuff, but they're playing at a different level. They're playing at the metal level where they have an organized program. They have clinical clarity algorithms, right? You see it collecting herb formulas, clinical pearls, all that stuff. That's at the earth level. You're just gathering not necessarily a hungry ghost, but it's at that level where it's more, accumulate, collect, right? And if you're playing at that level, you should, but at some point you're going to outgrow that. And the way to outgrow that is not to just get more and more facts and try to climb the escalator faster than everybody else, but it's to start organizing them in a way that makes sense. So that way you can start to create something of value. You can take your clinical pearls and you can thread them. This is where we start with clinical clarity. And I know not everybody comes in here with a full bag of clinical pearls, right? So we can provide those as well. It's not a problem, right? Of course. And it's a case-by-case basis. That's not a problem. The best thing to do is learn as you go with your patients, right? Maybe you have a blind spot there. And that's why we have a chat group where people can help each other. But ideally, we want to get off of that escalator and get onto a different one, a much bigger one, a much larger one, which is more about structure and creating a program and a process, right? And moving somebody through time, taking the information you have and bringing it to life and creating a process by which somebody can actually use that information and get a result and get a transformation, right? Whole different level. So this keeps going, by the way. This is just one transition point. I really like this thing with the I Ching and with understanding that change is going to be a constant. I'm a big fan of taking these Taoist principles and a lot of this old school philosophy and not just understanding it on paper or basically self-soothing with it, right? And just trying to feel like I know something about the universe or whatever it is, this false enlightenment kind of idea where you just read a book by yourself. That's important. We should do it, right? But we don't want to stop there. We need to bring these things to life in practical, pragmatic ways because there are so many people who I talk about spiritual top heaviness a lot, right? There's also people who understand Taoism, or they think they do, and they love it, and they say they do Taoist medicine, and they study with Taoist teachers and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, when you talk to them about a different type of business model, they're extremely closed-minded, right? All they have is reasons why it can't work, couldn't work, no because kind of thinking, right? Not yes if, right? Taoism is about finding a way, You're not going to find any kind of way with no because type thinking. You're going to find a way with yes if thinking. You see? So there's so many people who can mentally understand a philosophy, but they haven't embodied it whatsoever and they're not implementing it. We don't want to do that. We want to find ways to bring this stuff to life, because once we do, this is the really cool thing. Once we do, then you have your practice aligned to natural principles, right? So you've built in Taoist principles. You've built in a respect for nature already. This is why I'm always talking about fractal things, right? I'm always talking about, it's like natural law. You're doing things that align with the way things are. Not trying to impose some kind of model, some kind of training glitch, or just whatever over top of reality. We need to align to capital R reality. And Taoism is one way, right? Some of these old books is one way to get closer to viewing that, right? So we take that and we implement it directly into our practices, whether online or off, doesn't matter, right? But we have to understand that change is a constant. So expect, right? Don't just read that and go, yes, we will go with the flow. No, expect that there's going to be a constant change, and expect that it's going to trend downward in terms of your escalator, and then set up systems to offset that. So maybe that looks like having a time capsule mechanism where you have people taking videos of themselves, right? Maybe that looks like going, oh, okay, the market's moving. Everybody has a lot of facts and trivia, right? A lot of dots, a lot of pearls. How can I connect them? How can I now create a clinical clarity algorithm to move people through a process that's both universal and unique, right? That covers a lot of the major bases of things humans these days need to heal, and also has a lot of room for customization and bespoke changes depending on what somebody needs in their specific situation, right? So we have a lot to consider with this. You don't want to miss the boat due to having a closed mindset, right? We need to be open to new experiences. We need to apply ourselves. We need to step up, and we need to realize that this is the nature of reality. And if we're going to read the good books and we're going to do the meditations, we also need to get our hands dirty and get our boots on the ground and do it in a directed way, right? Not just kind of random action and chaos, but actually well thought out and aligned to natural principles. So another thing I want to share about this too is that once this gets going, right, it can get going really, really well. And you can start to go, okay, I'm riding this escalator and I'm actually fractally out on the next one and the next one, and just, et cetera, on and on and on. And you'll find you actually push the limits out too far, and you can bring a whole cohort of people with you, right? You're like all your initial patients and stuff, they're going to go on a freaking ride with you, right? But just remember, you have to leave yourself like a trail of breadcrumbs and be able to come back to the very start and meet people where they are, because the whole market's moving up in sophistication, right? But not linearly. You're going to have a bell curve. So you're going to have different people come into your world at different points. I call them fractal foundations, right? It's kind of where somebody starts, and people come in with all different little starting points. So you want to try to remember that we're pushing it as far as we can, like in terms of going deep and going to the edges and just being pioneers here. But we also need to be able to come back for new patients and be able to guide them from wherever they are. And it's really interesting because we can get to the point where we habituate too, right? We take our own selves for granted. We take our own knowledge base for granted. We can climb so far up these escalators of our careers and learn so much stuff about the body and how it works and how to be healthy and how we're connected to our environments and all these things. And eventually this stuff will start to distill down and become common sense for us, right? What today's epiphany is tomorrow's common sense. Yeah, but yesterday it was like a massive problem. If you don't understand something, it hurts your brain. Then you figure it out, it feels great. And then we take it for granted as common sense. And these are things we do with our own knowledge too. So just know that there's probably some things that you have inside that you're not valuing because you think it's just normal, right? You're just taking it for granted. And those things could be massive, massive, massive game changers for the people you're helping. So for example, I'll tell you a quick story. I just spoke with my dad, and he had a sleep study done and all this, stuff for a physical and everything. And basically they said that, he wasn't sleeping enough, and he read me the report. He said the report had all these things on it. And he said, there was something on there. I don't even know what it is. And I said, well, what does it say? And he goes, well, it says the patient should be counseled on, here it is, sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene. What is that? And I was like, okay. This is like 101. I'm like, Dad, I've already built a program on this. Just go through my stage 3 modern vitality, right? I'll teach you everything in there. It's fine. But those kinds of things, you got to understand, that's like common sense to us, right? But even the people closest to us may have no idea about these things. No idea, right? So let alone what the rest of the public is doing. So just try to remember that your view, even if you have a high view, right? You've been going up escalator after escalator after escalator. Your view may be something you're used to, right? But just know it could be a much more advanced perspective than somebody starting out on the ground floor. So you need to be able to kind of come back down as needed and navigate the whole thing. And you're going to have different people at different stages. And some people are going to be more advanced and sophisticated, and you're going to tell them about the microbiome, and they're going to say, yeah, I know that already. And then you're going to have to be able to evolve your conversation to the next fractal level and say, okay, so here's how we influence it. Here's how we turn it on or off. Here's how we affect your gene signaling. Here's what you're going to do, and here's when, and here's why, right? And then they're like, oh shit, okay, this is I didn't know how to, I knew what it was. I didn't know how to interact with it. Here you go, right? That's why you're here. We're pros. And then you're going to have other people, and you're going to say, you have a microbiome, and they're going to say, what? Microwave? You're going to say, no, it's microbiome. I got to teach you this, right? Because it'll change your perspective on how you treat your body and how you start to heal. So it's very important to keep a dynamic perspective about your own point of view, right? But also remember how far you've come and value that. Keep going, because just know that the escalator is going to constantly be going down. It's just how it works, right? But it's also a good thing that's happening, because that means everybody else is kind of coming up relatively, which means you're going to have a more sophisticated market. You're going to have more competitors. It's fine, right? This is evolution. We can't escape this. It's a fitness landscape, right? And just know there are some things that you take for granted and that we do habituate. And sometimes we only appreciate something when we have contrast, right? Which is often in the form of loss, when it's not there anymore. So we should appreciate what we have. So those are a few of my thoughts. All right, let's get to work.